an important topic enough to explain. You know, my problem is that I love this topic of this, what I call Lacanian theological debates, you know. This where we sometimes speak as some initiated circle and ordinary people cannot follow. But I think precisely that this topic of the big other and some similar topics are so crucial and can be clearly explained that we don't, I hope, annoy the others. It's worth to go on a little bit into that. So first, I will do something, then I will ask you to give a hint. And you know what is so interesting? That's the first thing to learn for Lacan. Is how Lacan is cheating all the time. I mean, all great philosophers do in a nice way. What do you mean by cheating? I mean that he is constantly shifting his position, but he tries to mask it, to cover it up, you know. Especially, you should be, for example, at the beginning of some seminar, when Lacan says, before we begin, I will just recapitulate what I said the last year. Be attentive. It means he will totally shift his position. And sometimes the polemic is even direct. Did you notice how Lacan likes these great axioms, like the big other doesn't exist, il n'y a pas de grand autre, or the desire of the analyst is not a pure desire, the very last page of Seminar 11. Now, you should always ask here, if you read Lacan, an extremely stupid question. But who is the idiot who claims that there is no big other, and there is always one answer? Lacan himself, a couple of years ago. For example, the big other doesn't exist. Well, for Lacan of the 50s, it definitely existed, with all pathetic assertion. Or, the desire of the analyst is not a pure desire. That's his self-criticism of maybe his best-known seminar on the ethics of psychoanalysis, where Lacan's point is precisely that, the desire of Antigone as a model, basically, for analysis. Desire is a pure desire of a pure signifier, and so on and so on. Which is why, incidentally, I am more and more against that seminar. I think it's a deadlock, dead end. And I think that Lacan immediately turned away. That, you know, one proof is which one? Jean-Claude Milner noticed this. How everyone, even me, likes to refer to Lacan's formula of the only axiom of psychoanalytic ethics is ne pas céder sur son désir, do not compromise, do not give way as to your desire. But what people don't notice is that Lacan says this just once or twice in one lecture. He never returns to it. And it can be, I think, very nicely demonstrated why. This is not Lacan's position. It was just an attempt. Then things get immediately more complicated, and so on and so on. So again, concerning Antigone, this is why I'm so obsessed with Antigone. You know, I can tell you, probably, maybe you know the story, but I like to repeat, this is my favorite story, that my dream is to do Antigone. How? You know what Brecht did in his 3 early so-called Lehrstücke from early 30s, learning plays? The first big one is Ja-Sager, the guy who says yes. And he did 3 versions, all possible. It's a wonderful authoritarian play which in Germany in early 30s, all the liberal left attacked it, only basically the right-wingers greeted it. It's the story from a Japanese no-play of an expedition which goes to mountains to bring medicine to the people, and then young boy joins them, and then young boy gets ill, they tell him, the leader of the expedition, you are now an obstacle. We warned you what will happen. Now, if we are to progress and we have to go on, we have to throw you into the valley to kill you. And then it's that wonderful, what I was talking about yesterday, forced choice. where the leader tells him, in any case, we will throw you into the valley. But still, the custom says that we must ask you, that you have a freedom of choice, but it doesn't matter how. And it's done in such a wonderful, cynical way. The guy reflects what, and then the chorus Brechtian sings in the background. He's thinking, but whatever will be the result, he will. And then the guy says yes, accepts as an act of freedom, and here accepts death. And here it's very nice to discover in Brecht what is usually considered the great reactionary motive from Nietzsche, Wagner, and so on, amor fati. That is to say that the highest act of freedom is to accept as your free decision what in any case will necessarily happen. That again, true freedom is. And here, sorry, I'm so evil. Yeah, there is at least one, don't take it personally, one blonde girl. Don't take it's fate. Although I am the first to admit that, the only thing that this shows is that I am getting old, because if I remember, there are two, that I remember these jokes at least were moderately in, I think some 10, 15 years ago. But one joke is theoretically correct, Hegelian. Don't take it personally. Maybe you know it. It is absolutely in a Hegelian way correct, and I'm not losing my thread. It's connected with this true freedom, not freedom to choose where you have a choice. I eat chocolate cake, strawberry cake, but true freedom is to choose what is necessary. I'm referring here to Hegel's theory of Gewohnheit, custom, where Hegel, it's in my big fat book, but not these jokes, where Hegel says in a wonderful way that animal becomes human through customs, habits. And then he says a couple of wonderful things which are, I think, even better than Michel Foucault on madness. He's already there. He says that madness is not simply an aberration, whatever, that madness is constitutive of being human. Even if we all do not have to get empirically crazy, mad, but all our civilization, symbolic universe, can only be apprehended as a reaction to the threat of madness. And his idea is that precisely reaction to madness is, madness in the sense of this psychotic withdrawal, and then you do habit as a second nature, to get some minimal stability. So, and then Hegel in a wonderful way says that once you are a human being, even your natural functions, like breathing, eating, whatever, become a habit, a freely chosen habit. And no, this is the example, theoretically constructed. That is my nature, I especially like this, now I will admit it to you how evil I am. Because, I am evil, I tell bad taste joke. But the joke is that if I say sorry, no, like, now I can be dirty, but I can say, I said sorry, so what? Okay, let's go on. Maybe you've heard it, but it's a very simple one. It's that there's a beautiful blonde girl who is all the time just sitting there and has these earplugs listening to something. And people are worried, for hours she's doing this, why, So somebody says, let's stop this, and pulls the plugs out. And the girl, after 1 minute, drops down dead, So what was it? They put the plugs to listen. What was it? She listened to the voice telling her, breathe in, breathe out. She was too stupid to know it. But I think it's correct. I'm for blondes to avoid me understanding. I think it's correct. Because definitely, you know that it's literally even true. Don't you know that some doctor who is doing things that I absolutely reject? I mean, birth is for me something so disgusting, unnatural, that for me to be there. But he told me that literally small children can forget to breathe, You have, as a way, it can die, you're newly born. So what I'm saying, again, is that is that this is why also, as Hegel knows it, it's already Hegel, that the first act of freedom is that you treat as freely chosen something which is in itself natural necessity and so on and so on. The moment you do this, the big other is here. But okay, back to Lacan, back to Antigone. This is why Hegel says it very nicely. Why does Antigone insist on funeral rites for her brother burial? Because precisely as Hegel says it, through funeral, you change into a free symbolic act a natural necessity, the ultimate natural necessity of dying. But okay, I'm sorry if you know it, I would like to have your reaction if you have it. What's my problem with Antigone? Well, I think she is an evil egotist bitch. Why? Let's go step by step. My three versions, in Brecht. The second version is then, this is the first version. Then Brecht wrote a second version where the boy argues back and they said, okay, you are right, we will not throw you. And the third version, the boy dies again, but not because of some mythic custom, but because of rational reasons. So my idea is to do the same with Antigone. The first one would be the one we know from Sophocles. And the story takes a different direction. At the crucial moment in the middle, the debate between Antigone and Creon. No? So in the first one, it's the way it is, you know. In the second of my versions, Antigone wins the debate. That is to say, Antigone convinces Creon that, my God, he died in death, we are all equal, there should be funeral. And then what happens is what Creon, who is for me almost a good guy, was worried about. That we are just after a civil war, and if you do something like bury publicly the traitor, people will arise, new circle of violence, blah, blah. In my second version, this is what happens. There is a proper funeral for Creon, but as a reaction to this, because he is considered a traitor who, weeks ago, attacked Philippi, the city, there is new chaos, and then the whole city is in flames, and then that would be the last scene in my second version. Antigone is desperately walking around the city, seeing flames everywhere, and she is repeating her stupid hit line, remember, I was created for love, not for war, you know. And then the chorus should say something like, fuck you bitch, you caused this. Kind of an Antigone bet, let's see. But then you can imagine, if you know my Stalinism, what is the third version, which is my favorite one. Antigone and Creon are debating. Then Chorus steps forward. Usually Chorus is the embodiment of stupidity, no? It's this common wisdom, opportunistic wisdom, you know. Chorus is what? Chorus comments, proverbs, and so on. But you know that there is nothing more opportunistic and stupid than wisdom, proverbs. What do proverbs mean? Let's say you try to do something, a risky act. You succeed. Then I can always find a proverb to justify it, no? Then I tell you, oh, we have a proverb, I don't know, in Slovene we have proverbs like, only those who risk profit, you know, only through risk can you succeed. Let's say you don't succeed, you fail. I can imagine chorus with another line. Something like, we have it in Slovene, I don't know if in your languages we have it, we have this vulgar, cynical wisdom of, you cannot urinate against the wind. You know, and again, you know, this is for me the essence of wisdom, this total opportunism. Whatever happens, you can make this wise comment. And speaking about language, I cannot refrain from telling you a wonderful, totally dirty, disgusting story that happened to me. I was 25, 30 years ago at Jacques Miller's seminar, and I was talking precisely about this. But my French was still bad. So I confused the verbs to urinate and to shit. And I said in Slovene, in Slovene we have a proverb, on ne peut pas chier contre le vent. And Miller was a man. He looked at me and said, the wind must be then really strong. This was a night. We Lacanians are maybe not stupid all the time. No, but what I want to say, let's go on, is that In my story, it's a Jacobin revolutionary one. While Antigone and Creon are fighting, debating, the big dialogue, the chorus steps forward and says, we are representatives of the people. We have enough of your feudal rich people fighting each other and ruining us. We establish popular dictatorship. You are both arrested and killed, and chorus becomes a kind of a revolutionary Jacobin that Committee for Public Virtue, and they are both liquidated and so on. That would be my favorite Antigone, if you ask me. No? But okay, so much about freedom. Let's go on. So again, as I said with Lacan, you should. This is what's so difficult with Lacan. He really is a creative thinker in the sense that even if you don't agree with him, he fights all the time, struggles with in terms of music. Lacan is not Mozart, Lacan is Beethoven, This is what always fascinated me. I think there is even some kind of ahistorical constant. There are three types of geniuses, I think. Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, or in painting, Da Vinci, Raphael, Buonarroti. The first, Bach, is maybe most sympathetic. Is guy who is a genius but doesn't make big fuss out of it. Simply artisan, I do patiently my hard work. I'm just working. This was typical Bach. Then Mozart, it is spontaneous genius, like Raphael in painting. Elegance, melodies or whatever just flow out of you. And then you have this heavily struggling genius, who kind of has to fight with material. And this is typically, this is Beethoven, that. Like once, I remember when I was young, no, you don't remember them, but they're still popular, those Leonard Bernstein popular musicals. Yeah. There he did nonetheless something nice there. There was one show, whatever, about Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. And I didn't know even that this is one of the few cases where notes survived, drafts of Beethoven of all previous versions. And it's extraordinary to see how long Beethoven was struggling. It wasn't just in a Mozart way that stupid fake melody that it simply came to him. It was extraordinary, and you can feel how they really don't work, the previous versions, no? So I think, again, Lacan works in this way. He tries this path, he withdraws, but what is most dangerous to prevent you understanding Lacan? That sometimes he does it even not only within the same year of the seminar, but even within the same text. For example, his motive of Kant avec Sade, Kant with Sade. Why is Sade the truth of Kant? If you look to this same ethics seminar, in chapter 4, I think, where he talks about St. Paul and so on, his idea there is still of this law and crime transgression, is still the simplistic St. Paul version. To put it very simply, for something to become object of desire, it has to be prohibited. I don't care for this, but if I see that you want it or that you prohibit it to me, then this arouses my desire, and so on and so on. So it's this simplistic logic of transgression. This is why, incidentally, I hate Georges Bataille. Because all his logic of this transgression or whatever is based on this, which is why, I don't know if you know this, when so-called sexual revolution began in the early mid-60s, he was opposed to it, because he said, wait a minute, if everything is permitted, then what's the point of my big transgression, He went to the end in this paradox of how, in order to do the transgression, you have to have the law, prohibition. So he went to the end and said, maybe we should even fight for the prohibition so that we can then, obviously this doesn't work. But then,
but doesn't your
sorry?
Implicit rule theory just falls straight on?
I have an answer here, if I got your point. The implicit rule would be precisely the rule of what I call inherent transgression. I think there are transgressions and transgressions. If we return to this political talk, there are transgressions which are real transgressions, but there are transgressions which are just, you violate the explicit rules, but in reality it's part of the system, as it were. And I'm so sorry I don't have that clip. I don't think, do you know, okay, I will be open, and if more than 3 of you say yes, I will kill myself. Do you know my brief analysis of a scene from Casablanca? No, fuck you. I really not. Cross your heart, swear on your mother's grave if she is dead. Otherwise you kill her and then swear on me. No, it's, this is the pure, I really want to. I'm so sad, but maybe later, maybe I think you get it. I can download it and play it to you to convince you. Because I discovered just this morning a couple of wonderful clips which make the theoretical point. For example, I will show it to you, maybe even in the afternoon, the one which I quote 3-4 times, but it's so Lacanian. Do you know that how publicities change? When I was young, at least this was good about the 60s, 70s, things were happening in publicity which today are more or less, at least in so-called developed West, unthinkable. Publicities were much more subversive. Even at some point, early 70s in England, there were publicities where they were negative publicities, in the sense of the whole point was to make fun of the product, and the joke was just, it will be so funny that even if you claim how disgusting it is, it will attract you, the customers. For example, I remember one wonderful one, a fat old couple with is sleeping, ugly old wife, ugly old husband. They both have, of course, their teeth in water glass, no? And then in the middle of the night, the wife awakens and says with this verbal, go to the fridge, bring me a yogurt. The guy gets up, goes to the fridge, opens it and says, smells the yogurt, you want to eat this? That was it. These were nice times, you know, but it was enough just to mention it with all this. I think that now Germans are not so bad. Because a couple of years ago, I saw one in German, which is wonderful, with all the gay, homosexual, sexual undertones. It was a publicity. I was in the movie, this was a movie theater, I saw it. I was with my wife, and you will immediately see why my wife started to cry and slapped me there. Gave me a step. Why? Because the publicity was this one. A young couple, poor, is getting ready to make love on a beach. And then she tells him, yes, we do it, but please, for security, no. This is a couple of years ago when there was more AIDS scare. Just because clothes is kind of a cheap cafeteria, go there and buy a condom. Then we do. Okay, the guy goes there and sees there close to the toilet where you have the automat, there is automat machine for condoms and machine for Magnum ice cream cones. And then he desperately looks, and then you have just the inscription. Sometimes you have to make the right tough decision. And in the last shot, you see him in a very, because he looks, yes, he has just enough money for one, of course. No? And the last shot, him gladly in a fellatio way licking the. And then I started to shout, that's victory of male, we will not be terrorized by women. And then the above mentioned accident with my wife. Let me cry, no? So they do it, but what I want to say is that another of these 30 years back, genius, I mentioned it 1 or 2 times in my books, is, maybe you know it, I'm sorry if you already heard it, an Australian publicity for beer. You remember that fairy tale, we all know it, a girl walks along a stream or river, sees a frog, kisses the frog turns into a nice young guy, no? Although, as a feminist, nonetheless, I'm tempted to say that, referring to you women, isn't it unfortunately that your more regular experience is the opposite one? You think it's a nice guy, you kiss him, you see you frog. But okay, But then, it's again along the same lines where my wife, if she were to be with me, would have slapped me and started to cry. You know what then happens? Yes, it's short, half a minute video clip. It begins with this start, no? This part of the story, no? A girl walks along the stream, a frog kisses the frog, and the frog turns into a young man. You know what then happens? You can guess. The young man looks with desire at her, kisses her, and she turns into a bottle of beer. This is what I want, you know. And then she asks a bottle of beer, do you also have a sister? Like, I go home kissing and eat more of beer. You know why this is correct? Because I think that this is the way the man relates to it. It is this sad logic of reducing the other to a partial object, just to an object, you know? I think, basically, this is part of my long, and now I'm almost a cultural conservative, pessimism. You know how I read this publicity? Announcing a trend, I'm sorry if you know this line of thought of mine already, a trend which really makes me worried. I'll put it like this. There are some radical cultural theorists who claim that although today we have free sex, but that there still is one taboo. Sex with love and a permanent partner is still a norm. The idea is that first it was sex for children, that fell. Then it was you have to be married, that fell. But the last taboo is sex with love, faithful to one. And then they claim that Chicago girl, I met her once, Laura Kipnis, she even wrote the book, maybe some of you know about it, with a simple title, Against Love. Claiming again that love is the last, to put it in primitive leftist terms, bourgeois taboo. No? I wonder, I claim that along the lines that I referred yesterday to Judith Butler, you know, all this changing, this permanently reconstructing yourself, your identity, plasticity, no fixed identity. I tend to agree with Alain Badiou, who developed already this idea that today more and more love is transgression. What ideology, real ideology, like the way I spoke yesterday about North Korean and party, the big mother or whatever, not explicit, but the real message you get from society is not this patriarchal, marry, be faithful. It's what I call kind of a hedonist Dalai Lama Buddhism, you know. Be authentic, be truly yourself, experiment, create your identity, don't get caught in cliches. Incidentally, I'm totally for cliches, of course. You know which is the best? You know Sam Goldwyn, the big Hollywood producer. You know that he was famous for so-called Goldwynisms. Apparently stupid mistakes or stupidities, and some are wonderful. Like, you know that Lillian Hellman played Child's Hour or what? About two lesbians implicitly in love, not knowing, and Sam Goldwyn did a movie. And then somebody told him, it takes, but there is a problem, Hollywood rules, you know, homosexuality in the classical Hollywood prohibited, but it takes place among lesbians. You know what Goldwyn answered? No problem, we will change it, it will take place among Americans, you know, lesbians. Like, but it's clear from memoirs, people who knew him, that he cultivated this image, no? And some of his so-called mistakes are quite nice, like his famous statement when he rejected a gentleman's agreement. No, he said, oral agreement isn't worth the paper it's written on. That's another paper. But the really beautiful one is, the legend is that one of his studio guys told him, listen, we are criticized by the press that there are too many old cliches in our films, no? And he wrote this legendary memo to his scenario department. Please invent as fast as possible good new cliches, you know. And he was absolutely right, I think. There is no language without cliches. He was right, simply. So, Sorry. Now this will bring us, speaking about Hollywood censorship and what is the other thing that I mentioned? Yes, this game and so on, connecting with Big Other. You know where I will now give you an empirical proof of the Big Other. And namely, referring to the now officially greatest film of your times, Vertigo. You saw it, no? You remember a scene, it's incredible. A scene in the middle of the film, like a little bit before the middle, when Madeleine, okay, we later learn she's not Madeleine, jumps into Golden Gate Bay, and he, Scotty, James Stewart, drags her out, takes her to her apartment, and what is implied that he does is because she's freezing cold, no dirty sex, he undresses her and puts her into his bedroom bed, while above the kitchen sink he hangs her dresses. That's what you think. If you don't believe me, do a simple experiment. We, because of the narrative frame, we automatically assume, because it's narrative logic, that what is hanging there is her underwear getting dry and so on. But do something. Now with DVDs it's easy. You have one long, how do you call it, panning shot or what then? On this side, whatever, your right side, he is sitting in his drawing room, Scotty. Then there is a kitchen sink, and this is the door to his bedroom. Camera moves from him and to the door, when then, in his nightgown, Madeleine exits. Okay, now put it on freeze the moment you see their underwear hanging. Put it on freeze, and you will see what?
There is no underwear.
Yeah. Just kind of towels or abstract
and
things.
the dress.
Yeah, and then I read in a book on Vertigo. You know what happened? Hays Code censorship. Vertigo was shot in 56, 57. These were the last years of Hays Code. No? And as part of this, they insisted, the censors, that it shouldn't be really underwear there, because if it is really underwear, this would have been a proof that he saw her naked while undressing her, but they are not married. This violates Hollywood rules, so no underwear. What is so mysterious here? Just ask yourself a simple question. Whom are they protecting? Which gays? We viewers, automatically, we all think it is underwear. They are not protecting us. You see how? They act as if we have our own sinful gazes, but there is Big Other precisely in the sense of an innocent gaze who watches for proper appearances, and that gaze should be protected.
They're protecting their own.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful example of, again, if you don't take into account, include in this innocent gaze of the Big Other, the one for whom, as we say, appearances should be maintained. Which is why this is one lesson big for me of Lacan apropos the Big Other. Don't underestimate the appearances. Now to give you the perfect example, and after I talk about it, I will really show it to you. I will try. There is 2/3 into Casablanca, a wonderful short scene, which is totally ambiguous. In the middle of the night, Ingrid Bergman comes to Humphrey Bogart, Rick's Cafe, to get from him that famous visa for Portugal for papers. And incidentally, the reason I like Casablanca, no, it's too much a classic, but there are so many strange things in this movie. It is a good film. I'm talking about, you all know, the big Casablanca, you know. Do you know, for example, did you notice one strange thing? How, for some strange reason, almost all names of the officers are car names. You have an Italian, Major Ferrari, then you have Major Renault, the other is very strange. Another thing, the guy who pretends to be a pure revolutionary, Victor Laszlo, the husband of Ingrid Bergman. You will, if you look at the film closely, you will observe a strange thing, how every time they go, and they all the time go to cafeterias, cafes, he orders a different drink, and a very eccentric one, like Pernod with a little bit of that and so on. And it gives a very strange message, you know, like this guy, pure revolutionary, where do they come, these decadent tastes or whatever, you know. And then Umberto Eco has a nice theory here that you shouldn't think about Victor Laszlo as a consistent psychological entity. He's just a combination of cliches, you know. Scenario writers were simply using different cliches for different scenes, and typically in Hollywood, if you meet like this with your mistress, you drink this, you drink that, it's a wonderful explanation. So, okay, let's go on. This scene, yes. She comes to asking for visa, and then it's the usual, it's nice, nonetheless charming, this noir, hard-boiled dialogue, you know, when he doesn't want to give her the papers, and he asks, she draws a gun to shoot him, no, and then he says, these are film bar dialogues, shoot me, you are doing me a favor, so this kind of thing stuff, you know. And then, after that, the only thing that can happen happens, they embrace. Now things get complicated. They embrace, and you get a fade out. Then, for 2.5 seconds, you see the tower of Casablanca airport, just with the light turning around, and then the camera will return to the scene, the two of them going on talking. Two of them, I mean, in his room up, Rick, that is to say Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. Now, to every normal human being, for every normal human being, a question arises here. What do these 2.5 seconds stand for? Or to be vulgar, did they do it or not? Are these 2.5 seconds, are they how should I call it, just a condensed signal of, let's, whatever you want, half an hour, 1 hour, when they were doing it, or does the same conversation go on? And here, it's a guy who is even very much against psychoanalysis, but not an idiot, Richard Maltby, British cinema theorist, who wrote a text just on this scene, 30 pages, and demonstrates in a wonderful way that this is how Hollywood works. Both at the same time. That is to say, the scene is constructed in this way, that it's not so much that the scene is inconsistent, but it's consciously contradictory. On the one hand, it gives you a series of codified signals that they did do it. First, it's a rule in Hollywood, because explicit sex was prohibited, Hays Code, that when a couple passionately embraces, and then you have a fade out, it means they did it. So you have this. Then, after we return to the scene, they are smoking cigarettes. It was absolutely codified, because you even have, you know, this proverb. What is the second and the third most pleasurable thing in the world? The drink before and the cigarette after, you know, like, it's even, you can say some phallic value of the tower there and so on, like, it gives you, again, I mean, it's wonderful, you know, to read, to compare. I read a wonderful comparison of Soviet censorship and Hollywood censorship in the dark times of Hays Code. If anything, Hollywood censorship was even more tough. You know at what level? Personal morality. For example, you know all these rules. If you don't believe it to me, you can check it. That even if it's a married couple and you show them in the bedroom, they should both be in their full pajamas, and beds should be separated. Sorry?
Lucille Ball.
Yeah. Although Lucille Ball is a genius, what she did is in her I Love Lucy, you know, this wonderful gesture where you break the rule of, isn't a classic of I Love Lucy, when something happens to her, she does this surprise gaze and looks into the camera. And you become, but okay, that's another story. What I want to say is that, but at the same time, you get a whole series of signs that it didn't happen. They are both properly dressed, the same as before, the same conversation seems to go on, and so on and so on. And Molby's great idea is that the way the film addresses us is precisely at two levels simultaneously. No? The idea is we live in an oppressive sexual regime. So I will at the same time give you a moral cover, like imagine you are watching Casablanca and you have a moral agency of Big Brother observing you and said, oh, what are you watching? They screwed. And you can say, no, look, nothing, no. They give you, at the same time, after you are covered like this, they give you clear codified signs so that just, how to violate prohibition, all the possible transgressions. And it's wonderful again to see, that for example, homosexuality and prostitution were prohibited. Not only prohibited as to be celebrated, but even prohibited as topic. But it was codified. Like, I hope I'm not insulting anyone here from that, but the codified way for prostitution in classical Hollywood was, if somebody says that woman comes from New Orleans, don't ask me why. She's a prostitute. So again, I hope.
You also see the same thing happen in cartoons today, for example, or where the film is targeting smaller children and adults as well. You have these subliminal messages that are very sexual.
I know. Even, do you know that even in Lion King or where, there is a big industry where they show, already in Snow White or where, that if you go freeze frame by frame, you see horrors there. I mean, yeah.
And there are a lot of images of genitals.
Yeah. No. I know. But partially I think this is our European decadence. Because I read a book on that, and they claimed that these were the decadent German expressionists who were helping Disney and so on, and that this was, as it were. But you know what? Why I like cartoons? Because I think that precisely, cartoons are for me a nice example of what Lacan means when he says that the truth has the structure of a fiction. Imagine a typical scene in a cartoon Tom and Jerry. Can you imagine a universe which is more brutal? They are all the time beating each other, slicing, laying trap to each other, whatever. And this is our brutal social reality. I want, once this was my dream, to do a movie which was just with real actors and act an episode from Tom and Jerry. At the end they should be both 10 times dead or not, which is why it's boring. But I like something in this idea. Now I go to the lowest of the lowest. I mean, I have low tastes, but this is too low even for me. Namely, how is it called? Sorry, Home Alone. You know what I liked in that film? It's the usual bullshit, but then the battle, the last 20 minutes. You are de facto in a cartoon universe. The two idiots, Joe Pesci. Everything happens. He puts his head in the water, there is alcohol, explodes, but, they become, in a cartoon way, undead, immortal. Like in Tom Jerry, you are sliced, you are overrun, no matter, in the next scene you are again here and so on. It's a pretty refined procedure, in the sense that how to get the movie, although it's all realistic movie, realistic, not in the sense it can really happen, but with real actors. But the way to get it is to understand that at a certain point you enter a different universe. This universe of cartoons where everything is possible and so on. And precisely because it is a cartoon, you can be much more open about the brutality of our lives. Precisely because it cannot really happen. It's the same with, to be frank, I'm a heavy romantic type. I may insult you with this, but I don't like Jane Austen. I am from Bronte for this fashion. But nonetheless, in one of her, I always forgot which one. Is it Mansfield Park or Northanger Abbey, where Jane Austen has also another nice example of the truth has the structure of a fiction. You know, this scene of typical scene that a group of rich people in a big house, father is absent, and 5, 6 young people are there, mixed sex, and there is love, passion, but we are 18th century, blah, blah, supposedly, they cannot. So what they do is they decide to stage some comedy, some play. And of course, through playing those roles, they can say what they don't dare to say openly. You know, like a couple, they love each other. They don't dare to say this openly, but they get the roles of lovers, and there, under the guise of a fiction, they can tell the truth, no? I also, okay, we can go on here with poetry, art. Do you know that, this is what really interests me in Hollywood. I found this in a book on opera and cinema. I'm an Anna collector. I bought it in the good bookstore, how is it called, not Jeff Books, Jack Books in London, kind of for £3, over 1,000 pages, encyclopedia, film and opera, where it says, it's wonderful, how this is the whole genre, where they take a play or an opera, so that the real life passions are mirrored in the opera story. And even, I'm starting to appreciate them. Do you know that in Mussolini's time, they did a very nice, almost feminist version of Anne Butterfly? I found it wonderful, where you know vaguely the story, although I think it's one of the most boring operas of all time, but that's another thing. No, I have a problem with Puccini. He was a right-winger fascist. Do you know this? He died in 24. You know what was the last message he did? The last letter. In 24, there was the last resistance to Mussolini in the parliament, and a socialist member of parliament denounced him. And he was found dead, tortured to death. And there was still an outcry in all Italy, pressure on Mussolini to step down, and then all the great right-wingers, you know, from Pirandello to Gabriele D'Annunzio, wrote appeals to Mussolini, stay, now the nation needs you. Among them, Puccini, his last. He was already in Switzerland, dying ill, but okay, let's go on. In that era, nonetheless, they did a wonderful version of Madame Butterfly, where, you know what happens in the opera? She is screwed by the American guy comes, and then she kills, I don't know, only herself, I think herself and the son, at the end it's this, no? That she is an opera singer who is in decline, in love with a big, it's very nicely transposed. It's a film about staging of Madame Butterfly, where in reality it's the opera singer, the woman, who was screwed 2 years ago by a much bigger opera star who tells her, I will come back, blah, blah. Then 2 years later, they sing in the same opera, but he pretends not to remember anything and presents to her, the same as in Madame Butterfly, his new wife and so on. And then they sing the opera on stage. She dies, but in real life, she says, fuck you, I will raise my kid. You know, kind of a more, it's a very nice idea to change it. Another genre here, it's wonderful. It's invented operas. For example, of course you saw, we all know by heart, The Big Loser, that is to say, Big Loser, I mean still the second greatest film of Citizen Kane. We all saw it, okay. You remember the opera that the mistress, later wife sings? That scandal, you know, for it's called Salammbô, I think. The opera doesn't exist. It's just a reference to a non-existent opera, although I heard now that this aria by Bernard Herrmann is nonetheless so good that although there it is heard in a consciously, they want a bad performance to signal that the girl doesn't know how to sing. But now Kiri Te Kanawa did serious performing. Like, okay, so let's go back. The big other. Yes, back to Casablanca. So what happens in Casablanca? Again, the idea is that this is how Hollywood functions, which is why those primitive leftists who think Hollywood is oppression, and if you give these hints about dirty secrets, you do something transgressive, you know. No, I think this is my big message. Both levels, like in the case of Casablanca, the official story, it's nothing, just a conversation, nothing happened, and what is indicated, that 2 seconds and a half are just a stand-in for, I don't know, 1 hour where many things happened. You are allowed both at the same time. And the crucial thing is that, again, for an ideology to function, you need both. These dirty secrets, which are just indicated, that's crucial. There is absolutely nothing transgressive about them. They are not only tolerated by power, they are it's the same as what I was telling you yesterday, all those obscene jokes, homosexual in the army. It wasn't we were resisting the discipline. Absolutely not. This is part of army ideology. I even think that if you do not participate in these obscene rituals, you are ostracized. I was doing this and I got into some trouble when I said, okay, I don't have sense for these stupid jokes and so on, dirty jokes, and then I was attacked for lack of solidarity or whatever. So I quoted in one of my books, I forgot his name, an American short story writer, did something wonderful. He wrote a short story, the title is simply, I think, As Time Goes By, just about this 2.5 seconds. That is to say, it's wonderful obscenity. The story is, it begins with Ingrid Bergman coming up, it exactly follows the film. And at the end of the story, it's the same. He gives her the visa, she leaves, blah, blah. But in between, you get 15 pages of absolutely disgusting hardcore, whatever you want. And it's the really nasty thing that this story does. It's wonderful. It's that it uses many of the standard cliché, well-known lines from Casablanca, or Humphrey Bogart repertoire, giving it an extremely obscene twist. For example, you know this standard Humphrey Bogart line, "Here is to you, kid." No? You know when he says this in this story, when he puts his penis into her mouth, like, "Here is to you, kid," and so on. But don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that there is something subversive in this. Okay, we don't have time to go with it. I think that this makes clear what Freud was about when Freud said something which is, I think, deeply feminist. And also it may appear how Freud says something which was often forgotten. Because what? In our usual understanding, we think that perversion is much more radical than hysteria. The idea is hysterics are women who are soft in between. You provoke a master a little bit, but you are basically just asking for, that's the main chauvinist idea, that women with their hysterical provocations just display a call for a true master and so on, just provoking, while the idea is that perverts go to the end. They really do it. That's not Freud. Freud said something wonderful. Freud says that no, perversion, there is nothing subversive about perversion. Perversion always functions as a dark, obscene side of power. Every power needs a perverse, obscene supplement. So it's very precisely because, again, perversion is usually taken more as masculine versus feminine hysteria. Freud is saying this all the time, that no, psychoanalysis begin with hysterics. Hysterics are the true threat to the master, not perverts. Perversion is just the other side of the master. Let me give you an example. I've written about it in that book of mine, I think, I'm not sure I write too many books, Living in the End Times. You remember that horrible thing in Austria, that Josef Fritzl, you remember him, the great guy who, it's a story which is so great. You know what I like about this type of stories? That they are so incredible that, imagine that story. You know, he had, I think, his daughter in the basement for, I don't know, 15, 20 years. Yeah, children. Now, if somebody were to tell you this happened, you would have said, no, it's too crazy, it's story. When things are crazy, sound non-realistic, but really they happen. Which is why we will talk here about, did you see for me the best Cronenberg film? Did you see M. Butterfly? You should. It's no wonder the movie was a failure, because it's so absolutely dramatic. It's the story of a French diplomat in Beijing, China, in the time of Cultural Revolution, who falls in love with an opera singer. They become lovers. She has children with him, and then he discovers that she was a man. That it's not a woman at all. She was just culturally stupid, because he didn't know that in Chinese opera men were singing women's songs. So now, of course, you will ask the stupid question, no? Like, my God, how were they doing certain things, you know? How didn't he notice, no? But no, I even read in a book on this case. Yes, now you get it, what's my point. This really happened. First I thought, oh, it's some kind of a crazy Cronenberg fantasy. The guy is still alive in the film Jeremy Irons. He kills himself at the end. The guy is still alive in French prison. Because the story is this one. The Chinese secret police use this woman, and the guy then even explained how you do it. They were making love always in darkness. The guy pretended as a woman to be very shy. It was never clear. And then he learned how to, it's very vulgar, I'm sorry. If you have small testicles, you can somehow push them in. Somehow, and of course, the pregnancy was simply that the guy says he has to visit his parents for pregnancy, and of course they took another child, whatever. But what I'm saying is that I like this case because it's so crazy, but it was real, you know. And here I had, I think already the last time, 2 months ago when I was here, I improvised on this, but it's important. Here, the point is how to read this. Here again, I have a conflict with some gay theorists who claimed, and I totally disagree, we debated about this film and about the other along the same lines, much more, much better known. It's also very good, but maybe a little bit less good than this one. You probably saw this one, Neil Jordan, The Crying Game.
Yes.
Where again, the follows current, the confrontation is when, what I like is that it's a wonderful reversal of, you know how Freud, in these naive terms, discovers the experience of feminine castration which leads to fetishism, how you undress a woman and you expect something, but you see nothing where you expect something, penis, no? Here, like, it's the opposite, no? Like, he sees something where he expects nothing. Okay, my point is this one, that how to read this? My gay friends and even some in big media, I mean, critics of the film, made repeatedly the point how these films are ambiguous, how they still count on this horror at homosexuality, that instead of openly endorsing homosexuality, they read it in this way. Of course, in both cases, and Butterfly and The Crying Game, the hero noticed that the object of his love is a man dressed up as a woman. But he repressed it. So the idea is disavowed homosexuality, how not radical enough, and so on and so on. My reading is a totally opposite one. It's quite shocking. My reading is that both films are films about courtly love, in the sense of elevating a woman into an absolute object, untouchable, and so on. I think, and Lacan gives some hints here, that when a man is in love with you, if you are women, and when you see push towards idealization, that's never true love. Lacan is very nice here when he says, true love does not idealize its object. True love is sublimation. Sublimation means I accept you totally the way you are with all your mistakes, and as such you are absolute for me. There is always a murderous dimension in idealization. That's the lesson of Hitchcock's Vertigo, no? He wants, you remember, when he gets Judy, this is really an act of murder, how he wants her perfectly redressed, shaped into the ideal of Madeleine, and so on and so on. So let me go on. You know what's for me the true message of these films? What does their shock mean? Here I agree with gay theorists. My message is this one, that this type of male love, apparently fanatical, idealizing, passionate love for a lady, is already in itself homosexual. If you are part of this love, when you screw the lady, your fantasy is unscrewing a man dressed up as a lady. In other words, I think that we have to be here very precise. In both villains, that is to say, M. Butterfly, but in Butterfly it's through police and so on, and the Crime Game, we have this traumatic scene when the guy discovers she's the penis, she is a boy, a man. Why is he shocked then, the hero? Not because, oh my God, it's disgusting, it's a man, not a woman, but it's not that something totally foreign, terrifying, unimaginable happens, but something too close to him, unheimlich, happens. He gets directly confronted with his fantasy. You know, that his fantasy was all the time to screw a woman, which is really a man dressed up as a woman. But this is a nice point of Lacan, how fantasies can be operative only at a distance. To directly assume your fundamental fantasy is terrifying. It ruins you. Which is why even Freud makes this clear in his best text on fantasy, which is that ein Kind wird geschlagen, a child is being beaten, where he says how the central fantasy is totally, primordially repressed. You see, here Lacan is very radical. Lacan is not saying, realize your deepest desire. No, you cannot. It's, you lose your subjectivity in a way. And here we come, maybe we could really watch some clips. At another, I've written about this in my which book, I forgot, fuck it, I think Organs Without Bodies. Vertigo, again Vertigo. There is a wonderful detail of Hitchcock's genius there about this. There is a scene at the very beginning. You remember when they meet in that Ernest expensive restaurant. Ah, fuck you, I have something that you don't have. Now it's a cheap pizzeria, they closed it down.
They did?
Yeah, this is American barbarism. But I was there when it still was Ernest, and I have matches here. My precious possession. Okay, so you remember that scene how he sees her, this fatal profile, Scotty sees Madeleine, and then there is the crucial scene. It's done so beautifully, just the detail, how he's sitting behind a bar, and he's like the fearful, timid way looking back. She's because she and her husband are getting out, finished the dinner. She's approaching him, and then you see it's this wonderful shot of her profile, enlightened in a totally non-realistic way, and then she leaves with her husband the room. Now, a French guy, I quote him in my book, some French guy, I forgot his name, Esterhazy, I think, Hungarian something, noticed something wonderful, which is a symptom. That almost all, practically all, interpreters of Vertigo read this shot of Madeleine in profile as a point of view subjective shot. That this is his subjectivity, fascinated, no? But it's a very mysterious mistake. Because, check it out if you don't believe me. If you watch the movie, you see it's not his point of view shot. It's what he imagines. Like, he doesn't look at her, he does this and like, as if, you know, it's literally too hot for him to look at it directly. And it's so typical. I try to interpret why almost all, practically all the great names, I mean, Laura Mulvey, who is the guy who did Robin Hood, name them. They all the big readers, they make the mistake here, describing this as a, but with Hitchcock, it's done very nicely, in the sense that, and this would be fantasy inside, it's something which is, as it were, so hot, intense, that you cannot even directly subjectivize it, you know. You cannot look at it face to face. It's as if you get burned if you get burned if you do it. Okay, yes, Casablanca, transgression, and all that. Let's now, nonetheless, come back to the so that after all this entire big detour to where we started the big other. The reason I engage in this detour is to make clear how, and now I go a little bit into big other, you terrorized me, so I have to do again, you know, usually, predominantly, the Lacanian dog says that the big other is simply the symbolic substance, the symbolic order which secretly pulls the strings and so on and so on. But the first thing to say is that the Lacanian big other is at the same time the exact opposite. The ignorant other, the other who doesn't and don't want to know, the other precisely the supposed innocent other for whom appearances should be maintained. You remember, for example, that legend, it started with, already with Catherine the Great, Potemkin, who was incidentally a good guy even, but he is known as Potemkin's villages. You know, when Catherine the Great, in late 18th century, as Russian Emperatrix, she visited south to impress her. Potemkin allegedly built a couple of villages with ideal dancing farmers and so on. No, but the interesting point is that if you are looking for the greatest case of Potemkin's village, you know which one it is. It's really horrible. When in the Great Leap Forward, late 50s, Mao Zedong heard rumors that there is hunger and wanted to visit it. So he said, let's take a train from Beijing to Shanghai and maybe stop here and there to see, you know. So the nomenclatura, the guys around Mao, were not sure where Mao will stop. So for about, I don't know how much is it, 200, 2,000 or whatever kilometers, the entire land around the railway was, you know, buildings were painted, enough food and so on, so that so that wherever Mao were to stop, if he were to stop and so let's see that village, he would have seen happy, well-fed people, and so on and so on. What I'm saying is that also, again, you find this I remember from my youth, it was a scandal when President Tito, the big one of ex-Yugoslavia, was dying. They built north of Zagreb, capital of Croatia, a party school to educate in Tito's spirit young cadre, and Tito wanted to visit it. The problem was that it wasn't yet finished, so just for Tito, they built express, asphalt, proper road. Tito came, left, and then they destroyed the asphalt, the road, and so on. You know, and this is incredible. Again, that's the mystery of Stalinism, as I said yesterday, how important it is. Which is why this brings us back to Lacan. I think that authority is not primarily the paranoid authority of the one who controls his own. Authority is much more the one who, as it were, this is how true authority works. For example, I prohibit you to drink, but then what's the English expression? I turn a blind eye. I leave some spaces open where I know you will drink. And the interesting thing is that the same Catherine the Great did. In a biography of her, the same, I read somewhere how one of her, people around her, warned her how her servants, after in the evening the party is over, are stealing wine and caviar, good food. And she said, I know this, but to keep them satisfied, I turn a blind eye. So again, this is why I mentioned yesterday Project X or that one. But that's how the true paternal authority functions. This is why Lacan says that traditional paternal authority is not only not opposed to enjoyment, it precisely opens up the space for enjoyment. As this, you know, secret transgressions, do it discreetly, I prefer not, yes?
During the Shah's regime in Iran,
Yeah.
exactly the
Really?
same thing.
Yeah, but what transgressions were you allowed? Which were the implicit transgressions, for example?
Well, not so much the
I hope not
translations,
reading
but the fact
Quran
that
or
people-
what this.
People were traveling
Yeah.
and visiting places, and everything looked beautiful. It
Yeah.
was set it up. Nobody looked hungry. There were no tax. People looked. He was surrounded by people who made everything look beautiful.
Ah, he did.
Oh yeah.
But did he at least have, because Mao later was intelligent enough, Mao was nonetheless not an idiot. He had an immense private in the sense of not controlled by state apparatus, security spy ring, which was telling him very discreetly what is really going on. Did Shah have that?
I think we live in a fantasy.
Yeah, this is very sad, yes, because then this is how you lose power then, you know. Mao was more intelligent here. He knew, even Stalin was intelligent here. He always had some private informers who, you know, told him, he was aware.
It's funny because when you go and look at the palaces now, and his palace was very plain and simple.
You mean Shah's?
The Shah's palace, but if you see the palaces that the people around him lived in, or the homes that people, it was a lot more luxurious, a lot.
This is standard. You know whom I don't like him too much, although he did write one good novel, because he's Mario Vargas Llosa. I met him when he was writing his Fiesta del Fierro, Ghost Feet on Trujillo, no? And he told me he visited, and he was also, it was exactly the same. He told me Trujillo basically lived in small, modest, but you know why he was nonetheless evil, he told me. But he knew all about corruption around him, and he was, of course, using this, you know, because every good leader knows if you want fidelity, you should allow corruption, and then you can always use it. You have people afraid all the time, will you or not. That again, the only sin of Trujillo was, it's true what you learn in the novel, was that he wanted a regular supply of young girls or whatever, no? But he didn't leave. His children or all around him were corrupted and so on, you know. This is very interesting. Yes, I think that even Mao, okay, we cannot compare them, it's still a little, but Mao was the same. You know, he lived in the Forbidden City, but not in the big. He lived in a small cottage which was originally for some sub-servants of the emperor or whatever, you know. But this was, I think this is in a way part of the charm of a true dictator. That it's, you know, you enjoy much more power in this personal modesty, even.
Surely it's a reflection of the image, the superficial image that's presented to the dictator, their superficial image that they project to the people. It's a reflection of that same person.
Yeah, that's true, yes, although again,
Double storytelling.
yeah, but again, this is why, as I said yesterday, I found it significant and enigmatic North Korea. Because like, you know, in a nation which is starving, they openly display their stomachs, you know. Like, my son would have called them, my son is so evil, he calls me, how do you call that small water animal called seahorse, or what? Is this the name?
Yeah.
Yeah. My son started to call me seahorse. Can you imagine why? This was so evil, my God. Because he told me they learned in biology that seahorses are one of the few animals where the male is pregnant. He was referring to her evil son. Evil son. Evil, no. Okay, but so let's go on. So again, that would be the first point. No, the big other is even more maybe this benevolent agency which lives discreetly. The place is open for secret enjoyment. And here I think, we don't have time to go into the detail, Hegel is right, Lacan is right, partially, yes, immediately, in his critique of Hegel. You know, Hegel, master and slave, slave loses the battle or doesn't want to risk it, so master has the enjoyment, slave works. No, Lacan says the true enjoyment is that of the slave precisely in this, where the master turns the blind eye. Please, attack.
Yeah, so the big other is an inconsistent presence in the postmodern subject, let's say. But how do we account for the rise of borderline syndromes where we have in-between psychoneurosis? Right? In this way where the subject is thrown with no support in the symbolic.
Yeah. Okay, I don't have time to go into this in detail. And I'm also, I bluff enough, I should say, not enough. But I was, because I remember I was doing my studies in Paris with Miller, precisely when we were all reading that, the big old classic, Otto Kernberg, and this big topic of borderline pathological narcissism exploded. And Miller, okay, I can just give you, so that we don't lose too much time, how should I call this, the party line, the elementary position. He convinced me, Miller, in this. Namely that borderline is effectively today's form of hysteria. That traditional hysteria is reaction to traditional master. Today's master is no longer traditional authority, is expert science and so on. And the because Miller made very nicely this point that, this old joke, hysteria, historia, history, that there is a truth in it, in the sense that hysteria is historical. Hysteria is a reaction to the predominant figure of the master. So when the model of domination changes, hysteria has to change radically. In other words, and here, even more than me, my good friend Mladen Dolar years ago developed this nicely, the topic as a critique of Althusser of failed interpellation. Of how, Louis Althusser's classical theory of interpellation, ideology interpellates you, hey, you as what you are, father, mother, leader, worker, whatever. But Dolar did this quite ingenious thing when he says that hysteria is the proof of a failed interpellation. Hysteria is what? Hysteria is basically a question of what am I for the other. Like the minimum formula of hysteria would have been Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. Remember, am I that name? Like, you are telling me, this is the beginning of feminism even. Like you male patriarchal discourse, are telling me I'm woman mother. Why am I what you are saying that I am? This doubting one's interpellation. So again, don't ask me now about, sorry?
So hysteria is questioning it.
Yeah, hysteria is questioning, yes. It's a different questioning than obsessional, but I here agree with Lacan and Freud. These are very precise points which work. Where already Freud says, crucially, that obsessional neurosis is a subspecies like a jargon of hysteria. It's just that the questioning is displaced. In hysteria, you are the question. In obsessional neurosis, question is addressed at the other, and so on and so on. But again, so hysteria is not just some, which is why, now we get the next point here. Hysteria means I, as a subject, cannot ever identify myself as an object. And for Lacan, hysteria is the very birth of subjectivity. And so that even fantasy, at its most fundamental, is an answer to the hysterical question. In what sense? You know whom you should read? He betrayed Lacan, but still I think he's not so bad. You know, Jean Laplanche, his idea of otherness, opaque, he has a very nice theory where he says that, I simplified of course, that what's the situation of a small kid? He is or she is bombarded all the time by others' desires. When father embraces him, mother cuddles him, his brothers, sisters play with him, he gets it that he is a kind of a libidinal focus of others. Others expect, want something from him, but he doesn't know what. And this is the original hysterical experience, as Lacan puts it in Italian, che vuoi, what do you want? This primordial, as it were, impenetrability of the other's desire. And the idea of Lacan is that this is the birth of subjectivity, which is why a very nice feminist conclusion for Lacan against this standard traditional feminist theory, which says that modern subject is masculine and women are no. For Lacan, subjectivity is originally feminine. Male is already an objectified subject. For example, Lacan somewhere, Miller told me this once, improvised that, you know, in Descartes, you have this imperceptible slip where things go wrong. First, Descartes does this insight, cogito ergo sum, I think that I am, which is purely eventual processual. Then, Descartes does something illegitimate already. When he translates this pure processual, I think, therefore I am, into res cogitans. I am a thing which thinks. This is illegitimate. Every good philosopher will tell you, and this would have been, at its most elementary for Lacan, sexual difference. Which is why, and I like this, would you agree or not, that for every good Lacanian, and already for Schelling already has this somewhere, that, you know, this usual idea of femininity as masquerade, you know, this is usually meant in an anti-feminist way. We men have a firm ego, women are like onion, you peel one mask, the other, there is just a void, nothing. But for Lacan, this is it. This nothing in the center is the subject. I mean, this is, as Schelling put it, in very wonderfully, Schelling, the great guy between Kant, Fichte, and Hegel, German idealist, he uses this for the properties of subject. He uses this German word, I think, Anziehung, which means like putting on a mask, you know. Like, again, the idea being that men are too weak. Men, to become a man means you escape the void of subjectivity. You cannot accept the void of subjectivity. You have to identify with this is me, some firm substance or whatever. You know what? Life is shit, but we will go on with big... You know what I will do? What I always promise it, but I promise I will give it to you. Look, I'm cheating. In what sense? Obviously, the way we go, we will not be able to do all the program. But you know what I propose you? Is there some of slaves here? Sorry, democratic slaves, you know? like, that's why I got into this big trouble in India. Did I tell you, where I attacked Gandhi? I got into trouble. Okay, because I hate what Gandhi did with the untouchables, you know. He was for caste system, but in a typically fascist way. He just said we should recognize all of them. The untouchables also have their role to play. They are also children of God. This is the fascist solution. Let's still have capitalist workers, but we should say to the workers, you are also an important organ. You know, this is why fascists always like this organism. You know, capitalists are the head, workers are whatever you want, stomach or hands or whatever, so that everyone at his her proper place, you know. So, again, okay, let's...
The slaves.
Sorry?
The slaves.
Slaves, yes. This is, in this sense, I'm treating you respectfully. You are also son of God, sacred, and do with pride your modest work of helping. I hate it. Okay. Thanks very much, because I don't want to steal from the afternoon lady, you know. But really, I feel bad, so since I talk too much, yes, two things. First, yes, Slade, yes. Do you have your KGB secret police file, that is to say, emails of all of them? This time, the last time I told you, I can promise you something, and you don't have to read it. Another reason for death penalties to me, I hate that, you know, when somebody gives you his book, okay, I gave people the right to do this. But then, you know, a week later, oh, professor, did you maybe have a chance to read this book? And, you know, then, so I will not be doing this, no, but then what I promise you is that all the stuff that I was to deliver, because as always I cheat, it's from my forthcoming books, I will email them to the slaves so that they can simply, you will get all the stuff. And it's unpublished stuff, I will not, no, about all this. So, okay, so in the afternoon we go on, you know. But you work hard. Do you also have in the evening sessions?
Yes.
This must be so boring. Not a revolution, I mean. Sorry? I know in the evenings I'm working, I get to work because I'm in a band. I now finish the text on that when they ask me.
By the way, you switched it off.
Then I have to do something. I'm crazy. I work. So thanks very much and
Thank you.
see you at 4.